Hello and welcome to a special edition of the ESG 5 and 5 podcast, the podcast in which we spend 5 minutes exploring 5 key elements of the theme shaping the market. I'm Jake Hallam from the Climate ESG Capital Markets team, and in this month's special edition, I will be taking you through the key developments from COP28 affecting financial markets and in particular financial institutions. I think the first thing to reflect on, of course, has to be the UAE consensus, which is the landmark agreement that came at the end of COP. And what we saw was negotiations really playing out in 3 phases. So phase 1 set out some expectations around fossil fuel phase out, but this drew concern from many of the oil and gas producing countries. And then the second draft was very different, but was deemed to be inadequate by the EU and small island states, so not going far enough. And then the final text was eventually agreed and for the first time referred to the transition away from fossil fuels and also to a long-term plan around implementation. So I think whilst many feel that there are too many loopholes in the UAE consensus, as the agreement is called, it does at least create a framework to support implementation by the private sector and also a pathway to mobilize significant amounts of capital required for the transition. And that actually links quite nicely with our second theme, which is the need to significantly scale up the finance required to achieve the transition. As our own James Close put it, who is the head of climate and environment for NatWest Group, he said, if 2023 was the year of the transition plan, the outcome of COP28 shows that 2024 will be the year of transition finance. So this is the idea that we will need to move beyond the billions provided by governments to trillions coming in from the private sector, using tools such as blended finance and, where appropriate, also carbon markets. And I'll talk in more detail about developments across both of those topics in a second. But what is this finance for? Well, a significant amount of this will go towards renewable energy, owing to the tripling of supply by 2030, which was a commitment made by 119 countries, and also, for example, to the doubling of energy efficiency initiatives. So that's the call to arms to scale up transition finance. But the question is, how do we practically achieve this? And so the third key theme progressed at COP is blended finance. But taking a step back for a second, one of the question marks is how the scaling up of finance will be achieved, particularly for developing countries. There is a pretty urgent need to finance climate change adaptation, given their exposures to natural disasters, such as flooding and drought. So the first ever global stocktake, as it's known, identified some key focus areas, such as reforming financial architecture and promoting financial innovation. And so blended finance, our third theme, refers to the idea that multilateral development banks and development finance institutions should allow the private sector to take on bankable projects, whilst then partnering with the private sector, as well as the public sector and also philanthropic bodies across the more challenging projects. As an example of a response to this idea, the World Bank announced it would allocate 45% of its total annual financing to climate projects by 2025, with an emphasis on financial structures and tools, such as securitization, in order to scale climate finance more quickly. So we think blended finance will have a key role in mobilizing more financing across both green and transitioning activities, as well as adaptation tools at a reduced cost of capital. Then, another market in which finance can be directed to support the transition is, of course, carbon markets. And so our fourth key takeaway from COP is therefore regarding carbon markets and specifically scaling carbon markets. And so 4 industry initiatives got together. It was the ICVCM, the VCMI, the SBTI, and the GHG protocol. They got together and announced they will establish an end-to-end integrity framework to provide more consistent guidance on decarbonisation and the role of carbon credits. This will support the carbon market to gain more credibility, although this may only be fully realised when the compliance and voluntary carbon markets converge. And my final theme from COP is regarding the advancements in measuring and monitoring emissions, and specifically how they are helping financial institutions to make more informed climate-related decisions. So, for example, the Net Zero Data Public Utility was a landmark initiative launched at COP, which aims to establish interconnectivity between climate data providers globally. And equally, we saw action from specific countries, such as Project Perseus, which launched within the UK pavilion, which is working towards automating SME emissions reporting, starting with electricity consumption. And so this will also help FIs to make climate-informed decisions. And then I think one final point of this debate on this topic was around data being good enough to start developing views for trajectory decision-making, and in particular, not allowing the best to be the enemy of the good. So I think that's also imperative for FIs to keep in mind. So that just about wraps it up. thanks for listening to this month's ESG 5 and 5, which hopefully you have found useful. Please be sure to check out our 2 recent articles linked in the description, which highlight these themes and many more from COP28 in more detail. These articles were written by my NatWest colleagues who were there on the ground in Dubai, so I hope you find these equally insightful. And if you like this episode, please follow the channel and click the notification bell so you can get future episodes as soon as they are released. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.